Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, salatu wassalam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. The setup is a little bit different this week because we are in a kind of a lockdown, a semi-lockdown because of the coronavirus. So in the meantime, we'll be doing our sessions online so that we don't waste the time. And alhamdulillah, we have this means to communicate with one another and to continue to pursue our path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's just the beauty of spirituality, that despite the situation, no matter how harsh or severe or how restricted we become, there's always a way to continue our suluk, our path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And today we'll continue the station that we started last week, manzilat al-khawf, the station of fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is, in our times today, this station is very much suppressed. And I say suppressed, try and choose my words carefully, because people are pushing back against any mention of fear. Oh no, we don't say fear Allah. Allah is supposed to be compassionate, loving, and we're supposed to feel comfortable with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't say fear. We don't like that. But that's problematic. And what's interesting is when you read about the European history, from around 1500 to now, you find that one of the stations which was severely suppressed was the station of fear, the reminder of the Day of Judgment. The churches became less and less. They spoke about this station less and less, and you could see where that led them. And if we follow the same path, that will lead us to the same place. And we quoted Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi quotes several of the spiritualists and our leaders of faith, just to kind of remind ourselves of some of those. Dhunnun says that people will remain on the straight path so long as they still have that fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if that fear goes away, then they'll fall off the straight path. And the same thing with the heart. Fear of Allah in the heart burns a person's desires and their love for this life in a way that is healthy for them. So Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah continues by categorizing certain types of fear. In the Quran, there are different words that are used, and each one, although they're somewhat synonymous, there are differences, and we'll just go over them very briefly. Some of them are stations that we'll go over later on, and maybe others aren't. But I think all of them are. I'm not 100% sure. Among them is al-wajl. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-wajl. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. So this word wajl is one of them. Khawf is another. Khashya, khushu' is another. Al-rahba is a fourth. All these, as I mentioned, are not entirely synonymous. There are similarities, but there are differences as well. And a brief overview is fear, khawf, is tawaqqa' al-uquba. To fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to fear His punishment. That's what it means. And that's what fear is. When are we afraid? We're afraid when there's a possible negative consequence that can come about. Right? That is fear. Khashya, on the other hand, is a fear that is based on understanding and knowing. So this type of fear is a deeper type and a more intellectual type of concern and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهِ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Those who have khushu' of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are these scholars. Why? Because their knowledge of Allah has created this type of awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we will get more into that. There is a station, I think, in after the next one, or before the first volume of this book finishes, there's the khushu', and we'll talk more about that later. Al-rahba is another form, is when someone is now, their fear of Allah is manifesting itself in actions. So when someone is in a state of rahba, they are literally fleeing. Someone can be afraid, but they stand firm and they're trying to deal with it. But rahba is when the fear has reached an extent where they start fleeing, or they start acting in that way. Not necessarily fleeing. you can act that way. For example, by doing what's necessary to prevent the fear or prevent that which is the person's concerned about. So, for example, we are in a state of rahba because of the coronavirus, and we are acting. No, I'm sorry. Let me say it this way: we are in a state of fear over the coronavirus, but it is our rahba that's causing us to act in the way we're acting, meaning creating social distances, barriers, not going out unless it's necessary, washing our hands 50 times a day, not putting our hands on surfaces we don't know whose hands have been on it, keeping our 6-foot distance from one another, etc. That is rahba. That is when the fear has reached the extent where now we are behaving a certain way. And that's not something negative, right? It's not a negative thing, rather it's a positive thing. So when we have rahba of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are trying to protect ourselves from the potential uquba, from the potential punishment by doing istighfar, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for mercy, making dua, etc. The next one is al-wajal. Al-wajal is when the heart is moved by the remembering something or someone that we are afraid of. We are afraid of their power, or we're afraid when we see them. So this is more of the emotional side, where just simply thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shakes the heart. Right? And then finally, al-hayba. Hayba is I think a good way of translating it is awe. There's this sheer awe of something. And this word awe is a combination of emotions, one of which is fear. You have fear of something that's glorified and exalted in your heart. But that fear is also mixed with love and knowing who that person is. So I think an example of that is the mother and the father, right? You have this type of awe for your mother and father that, it's not just, I'm afraid because if I do something wrong, they will discipline me for that. But at the same time, the love that we have for our parents and the respect that we have, this is the hayba, this is the awe. And that is something that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And finally, al-ijlal. Ijlal is glorification along with glorification based on love. We glorify something or someone because of our sheer love for it. So those are certain words that are used throughout the Quran that have this feeling of fear, but it's mixed with either other feelings or fear of not necessarily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly, but what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of doing if we disobey. So we are in the station of khawf, one of those specific ones. And as I mentioned, I think most of these, if not all of them, have their own separate stations later on. So khawf for the fear, khawf, is for the average Muslim, whereas khashya is for the scholars and those who have a stronger understanding and stronger knowledge of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Hayba, the awe, is for those whose hearts are filled with love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ijlal are those who have a close place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ijlal is the highest form of these, and then the one under it is al-hayba, and under it is al-khashya, and under it is al-khawf. So when we go through this book, our goal is to kind of ascend that ladder so that we reach the station of al-ijlal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is a sign that the person is close. There's a nearness between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone who has fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reacts in a specific way, in a certain way. And what's interesting is that when it comes to fear of Allah, there is a uniqueness to it when you compare it to other fears of other things. If a person fears the oppression of a person, what do they try doing? They try fleeing, they try running away. They try to distance themselves from that person, from that individual, or that situation. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more fear we have of Him, the closer it brings us to Him. Because no one can save us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except Allah Himself. And that's why this is a station. And that's why it's important to develop this emotion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the more fear that we have of Him, recognizing that He's the only one that can save us from Him. No one else can save us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The closer it brings us to Him. So the more fear we have of Allah, and that fear is limited, and it's a certain type, as we'll get to in a moment. But the more fear we have of Allah, the more we will seek refuge with Allah. We will flee to Allah. We will hold on to Allah. So that's why it's important. Now, fear, and pay attention to this. This is important. Fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is meant it's meant to reach a certain goal. And if that goal is reached, fear no longer plays a role. And that is, fear is meant to separate us from sin. Fear is meant to create a barrier between us and disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If that is fulfilled, then there's no need to fear beyond that. So fear is meant to reach a certain goal. If that goal is reached, then there's no need to fear more than that. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no need to fear Him Himself. What we fear are the negative consequences, or what we fear is the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the punishment of Allah is conditional. Allah doesn't punish random people for random reasons. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not punish a person just because He is the punisher. He's not the punisher. There is no name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He harms or inflicts harms or punishes people. Rather, when He punishes, it's for a reason. There's a condition. And that condition is sins. Right? So Allah only punishes when there are sins. If there's no sins, there's no need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to punish. It's just not the point. That's not why He's there. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَا يَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ بِعَذَابِكُمْ إِن شَكَرْتُمْ وَآمَنْتُمْ. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to gain by punishing you? Absolutely nothing. Allah is meant to give you. He's meant to have mercy on you. He means to be compassionate towards you. There's no reason for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to withhold His bounties from you, unless those bounties are going to cause the individual to go astray. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala withholds. Or those bounties will limit that person's ability to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala withholds it because those bounties will actually serve as a harm for the individual. So if a person's fear is enough to separate them and to prevent them from doing sins, then there's no need to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beyond that. This is different than, for example, something like al-Raja, hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is unlimited. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's bounties are unlimited, our hope in Allah should be unlimited, because He can always continue to give and to give and to give. And to give a simple example, our hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us iman, gives us nearness to Him. Is there a limit to the amount of iman possible? Is there a limit to the amount of iman a person can possibly attain? Absolutely not. Is there a limit to the nearness a person can have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No. And therefore, our hope in achieving those things, and more of those things, is unlimited. Does that make sense? I think this is a really important point to recognize. Fear is conditional to punishment, because fear is conditional to sins. Because punishment, or what we fear of Allah, and that is His punishment, is conditional, or only comes about when sin occurs. If there is no sin, there is no punishment. That's why in paradise, there's no fear. Why? Because there's nothing to fear. No one's going to sin. There is no such thing as sin in the next life, and therefore there's no need to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in paradise, and I think this is a good example to kind of drive the point. In paradise, we don't have this station of fear. Why? Because there's nothing to fear. We don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have awe of Allah, right? And that just kind of that glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that moves our hearts and shakes it, but we don't have fear of Allah because the possibility of punishment is no longer there. And this idea, this concept is taken from the supplication that the Prophet ﷺ would say, Allahumma qsim li min khashyatika ma tahulu bihi baynana wa bayna ma'asiyatik. Oh Allah, grant me a portion of your fear, of fearing you, that will come between me and sinning and disobeying you. Does that make sense? The dua again is Allahumma qsim لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معصيتك. O Allah, grant me a portion, or grant me an amount of fear that will come between me and disobeying you. So what does that indicate? That beyond that, the fear that we want is that which will be enough to keep us away from sin. More than that, there's no need for it. Okay, continuing, Abu Ismail al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala says, الخوف هو الانخلاع من طمأنينة الأمن بمطالبة الخبر، وهو على ثلاث درجات. الأولى الخوف من العقوبة، وهو الخوف الذي يصح به الإيمان، وهو خوف العامة، وهو يتولد من تصديق الوعيد وذكر الجناية ومراقبة العاقبة. So Abu Ismail al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala says that fear is when the feeling of safety is taken away. So he defines fear through its antonym, through its opposite. Fear is when you no longer feel safe. Okay, and what causes a person to no longer feel safe is when certain news comes to them, certain information reaches them. If you're sitting down in your home and you're watching TV, right? Is a person going to be afraid? No, they're not going to be afraid. What causes fear is when some information comes to them that removes the feeling of safety. Okay? Person sitting down at home watching TV. News comes to them that there's a fight outside of your home or apartment complex, and there are weapons there. That news is what creates that fear. Okay? And for us Muslims, what creates our fear is the khabar, the information that we are getting from a specific source, and that is the Quran. Right? It's not anticipated that if someone's sitting down that, oh my God, at any moment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to zap me with a lightning. That's not what's going to happen. Rather, if they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they remember their own shortcomings, that's when the fear comes in. And as the verse mentions, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. The believers are those who, if they remember Allah, their hearts shake. Right? So it's when they remember Allah, their hearts shake. So it's something that causes it. And there are three levels to fear, as always. The first one is fear of punishment. And this is the fear that Iman becomes valid because of or by. Meaning, someone who accepts Islam and someone who chooses to remain on Islam, there is an amount of fear that they have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if there was no fear of Allah, if there was no belief that there is a next life and there's punishment, if there was no fear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes sinners, for example, then what's the point of abiding by all these rules and regulations? There's no point. And therefore, any believer, anyone who accepts their faith, accepts the shahada of la ilaha illallah, the testimony of faith, there is an amount of fear that they have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has to be that way. And as Voltaire, the Western philosopher, says, or in his life story, there was a point of time where he didn't believe in the next life. And he said that this idea of next life, it's not part of faith, it's not part of Iman. However, later on in his life, he said that there needs to be belief in the next life, because without belief in the next life, there's no meaning to believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the first place, in God in the first place. Why? Because there's just simply no vision. There's nothing to keep a person on the straight path. So every believer, everyone who is a Muslim, has an amount of fear. Now that might differ. Some people might have this amount of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and others might have a massive amount of fear of Allah. So the average Muslim, they have fear of Allah, but their fear is more towards, or exclusively towards, His punishment. They are afraid Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish them. And this fear comes about because of their belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wa'id, His threat. Those who do certain things, there is a hellfire for them. So they believe in that, and that's what strikes the fear. I'm not going to do this because I'm afraid of Allah. And subhanAllah, when you engage Muslims, this becomes pretty clear. Now, the average Muslim isn't the most practicing person these days. However, if you were to go to an average Muslim and say, "Hey, do you want to go drink?" Most of them are going to say, "Oh my God, what are you saying?" Right? They'll take it very offensively. Why? Because there is that fear there. Go to the average Muslim and say, "Hey, you want to eat pork?" They'll say, "Oh my God, no way." Right? Why? Because there is that belief. And then dhikrul jinaya, remembering their own faults, their own mistakes. And third, muraqabatul aqiba, being aware of the end results of sins. So believers believe in the next life. I mean, again, this even people who aren't the most practicing, you see this manifest itself, especially in times of hardship. The Muslim who isn't the most engaged with their religion, most connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when hardship comes to them, from what I've experienced, most Muslims will start saying, Alhamdulillah, there's a next life, it's okay. Except they'll counsel themselves and they'll process what's going on through the lens of belief in the next life. So they are aware of that. Right? They are aware of that. And even if their adherence to that reality is weaker than what we would want for them, it's still enough to keep them to keep a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, keep them connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And another way you find this manifest itself is through good deeds. I should give a little bit of charity because Allah loves that. I should help someone because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that. I'm going to check on my neighbor because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that. So all of this is just a sign that this person, there is the next life, and where things are going is something that they have in mind and their heart is somewhat attached to. Now fear, there are two things that really strengthen fear or cause fear. Two things. Or fear is connected to two realities. The first one is that which we are trying to prevent. I am afraid of getting sick. The more I fear that sickness, the more I'm afraid of that sickness, the more it's going to create that fear, or the more impactful that fear is going to be. The second one is fearing what leads to that sickness, for example. Fearing that which causes my fear to come about. So we're afraid of coronavirus. That in of itself is an element of fear. And because of that fear, we fear doing that which might cause coronavirus. Does that make sense? So with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are afraid of His punishment. And if we are afraid of His punishment, we will fear by default what leads to punishment. So the more fear we have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment, the more we will be afraid of doing or of being disobedient. So this is kind of the dynamics of fear. What happens a lot of times is people, they emphasize one point: fear the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fear the punishment of Allah. They're afraid of that. They're afraid of hellfire. But they forget about fearing that which leads to it in the first place. So in order to really enhance the station in our hearts and a positive impact and help our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are two things we need to remember. Fear of strengthening our fear of the unfortunate, I'll say, and then also recognizing that there are certain things that lead to that unfortunate consequence we are trying to prevent. Okay, the second level, الدرجة الثانية, خوف المكر في جريان الأنفاس المستغرقة في اليقظة المشوبة بالحلاوة. Okay, now they get really technical here. Okay, so the second level of fear of Allah, this is the above average Muslims, or those who have a little bit more experience with spirituality. They are afraid of their situation changing from good to bad. Now, let's put things in perspective here. The previous level, the person is simply afraid of the punishment, and they do what they need to do to mitigate or prevent that punishment from happening in the first place, right? So if someone isn't sinning, they say, you know what, alhamdulillah, I'm a good Muslim, I'm not sinning, and that's enough, right? The above average, their mindset is a little bit different. They're saying, okay, I'm not sinning now. However, I need to be diligent in the fact. I need to be diligent in making sure that I continue to live this way, because if I make a mistake, it could change my situation from good to bad, right? Does that make sense? So I'll try and further elaborate. Now, I am in a state of tuma'nina. I'm in a state of feeling safe and peaceful. Because remember, Abu Ismail, rahimahullah, defines fear as when the feeling of safety is removed. Safety and tranquility is removed. So this level, this above average level, is saying, these are people who are saying that I am feeling that serenity, that peace, that tranquility with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, I am still concerned that this might be taken away because of something that I do. And therefore, I need to be quite diligent in making sure that I preserve this in the first place. So you see the difference in the mindset here? And an example of this is the story of Adam alayhi salatu wassalam. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Adam, وَقُلْنَا يَا آدَمُ اسْكُنْ أَنْتَ وَزَوْجُكَ الْجَنَّةَ وَكُلَا مِنْهَا رَغَدًا حَيْثُ شِئْتُمَا. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Adam and his wife, Adam and Eve, you know, live in paradise, go about, you know, doing whatever you want to do. Everything is there for you. Just enjoy yourselves. And in verse in Surah Taha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ لَكَ أَلَّا تَجُوعَ فِيهَا وَلَا تَعْرَى وَأَنَّكَ لَا تَظْمَأُ فِيهَا وَلَا تَضْحَى. You know, in paradise, you won't feel heat, you won't feel cold, you won't feel thirst, you won't feel hunger, you won't be naked. You know, everything is there for you. But don't come to this tree. Don't eat from this tree, right? So Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was living a life of, you know, the dream, that which we are day in, day out trying to reach, inshallah, in the next life. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of the people of paradise. I mean, however, because of his disobedience, that situation changed. He went from perfect stability to this life that we know of. So although he was in a state of bliss, it went away. So the above average above average Muslims, they recognize that this isn't a guaranteed situation for us. If we are doing well now, that doesn't guarantee we will always do well later. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with us now, it doesn't guarantee us that He will be pleased with us later. And therefore, we always have work to do. And that's just the beauty behind it, that there's no retiring from Iman. You know, I mean, going back to what we were conversing about earlier, the spike in divorces in China because men are home more. You know, they're retired now, and it makes life worse. So that's not the case for Iman. And I was joking with my wife yesterday. I'm like, look at how lucky you are to have me as your husband. You know, I never retire. So you'll never have to worry about me, you know, being home and annoying you because I'm a grumpy old man. So it's just the blessings of Iman. There's always work to be done. There's always a purpose, and that never goes away. But the point here is, we're not guaranteed anything, and therefore a person remains, a believer remains concerned that they will lose what they have. And that is healthy Iman. That is a healthy mentality. I mean, if you want to look at it even from a business perspective, if you know, Windows is or Bill Gates was once the richest person in the world, that doesn't guarantee he's always going to be the richest person. Just because Apple is, you know, a super powerhouse of a company, doesn't mean that a competitor might come along, or is not going to come along later on and change that. So they're always on top of their game. There always are competitors. There always will be challenges. And if we're not on par, if we're not, you know, above our game and on top of our game, then we might lose that. And that's the situation of the believer. So this type of fear, this type of concern is not concerned with the sins that we are doing. Because there are people, alhamdulillah, you know, everyone is a sinner. You know, there's no one who has a clean slate. But there's a difference between someone whose sins are very, very minute, that it's almost unnoticeable. versus someone who is blatantly doing the major sins. So this above average Muslim, they're not deceived by their stability of their iman. They're not deceived by the fact that they aren't really sinners. But rather they are on top of their game by constantly reminding themselves that their situation can change if they slip. They can slip. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا أَيْمَانَكُمْ دَخَلًا بَيْنَكُمْ فَتَزِلَّ قَدَمٌ بَعْدَ ثُبُوتِهَا. Do not take your oaths as a game and as a plot in order to gain worldly gains, causing your foot to slip, meaning causing your iman to slip and to break. It can happen. And you have an example of a companion who went to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, make dua that Allah makes me wealthier. Make a dua that Allah makes me wealthier. So the Prophet ﷺ, first time, second time, third time, he kept advising him. The third time said, look, you are doing well now. Just kind of paraphrase and elaborate here. He was someone who was always at the masjid, praying 5 times a day, doing what they need to do, paying their zakah. The Prophet ﷺ said that, wealth might take that away from you. He said, no, he insisted. So the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him and he became more wealthy. And slowly, his attendance at the masjid started going down. His good deeds started going down. Why? Because he became preoccupied with his wealth. He became deceived with his wealth. Oh, I'm good now and I will always be good. That's just not the case. Look at the stock market now. If people had, it was a high market, the stock market was very high prior to the coronavirus, and then look at all of a sudden within a week or two, it just crashed, right? There's no such thing as stability in this life. Stability is in the next life, and therefore we need to always be on our A game. الدرجة الثالثة ليس في مقام أهل الخصوص وحشة الخوف إلا هيبة الجلال وهي أقصى درجة يشار إليها في غاية الخوف. The third level is Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says that you don't find the experts. There is no level for the experts when it comes to fear. Why? Because their fear becomes transformed into a more profound type of, it evolves into awe and to glorification, exaltation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we mentioned before, that you have fear, and then you have khashya, and then you have hayba, and then you have ijlal. So, if the average Muslim is at the fear level, the above average is at the khashya level, and then the experts are at the hayba and ijlal level, where it's not about the fear of punishment anymore. It's about the awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we'll get to later on. But just to kind of elaborate on this point a little bit, fearing, if you remember, as we mentioned just now, fearing is when obedience of Allah becomes absent. We fear Allah's punishment, and Allah's punishment comes about when there's an absence in our adherence and our obedience to Allah. But because the experts are always connected, there is no absence. The obedience of Allah will never be absent. They're always connected to that obedience. The remembrance of Allah is never absent. They're always connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, fear is not really a station for the experts. When a person reaches a certain level of nearness to Allah, it's no longer about the fear. It's about the hayba and the ijlal, the awe and the exaltation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which has an element of fear there. So, right? Also, as it was mentioned, that the fear is connected to a person sinning. The more sins that they do, the more reason that they need to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the experts aren't sinners, right? They're not sinning. They're not spending their time sinning and doing major sins and whatnot. So that fear weakens, but it evolves into an awe, the awe and exaltation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وهي هيبة تعارض المكاشف أوقات المناجاة وتصون المسامر أحيان المسامرة وتفصم المعاين بصدمة العزة. This is beautiful. Pay attention to this. These individuals, their exaltation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their hearts are shaken when they do something, or that hayb, that awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes out, they bring it out when they find time to privately speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the statement that I just quoted, Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala, what I quoted him right here, he's saying that they bring about their haiba when they unveil themselves and when they start, when their hearts start connecting more with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during times of private conversation with Allah. During the night time, when they're speaking privately to Allah, meaning it's a time where there isn't much going on in the world, it's night, and they're in a private setting. It's just between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In this point, they utilize their time to speak to Allah, to converse with Him, to have a private discussion. And if you have the opportunity to pray at night, then that is something you should hold on to with all your life, because there's nothing more beautiful, outside of the obligatory acts. There's nothing more beautiful a person can be given. There's no greater blessing aside from the obligatory acts than praying at night. But for those of us which is most of us, whose lives are very occupied, there's something else that we can do that's closely profound, almost as profound as praying at night. And that is when you go to sleep, when your head is on your pillow and you're resting, utilize those few moments before you fall asleep just to make dua. Say, "Oh Allah, this. Oh Allah, that. Oh Allah, this is my situation. Oh Allah, you see me," etc. Making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what brings out this awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as we've mentioned before, just to kind of refresh our minds, remembering or doing that reminds you of Allah Himself. He is there. And it reminds you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's might, His power, His capabilities. It reminds you of Allah's compassion and His mercy. It reminds you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears you, even though the distance between you and Him is you can't even count it in numbers. It reminds you how near you are to Allah and how near Allah is to you. When a person does that, and they do that a lot, it brings out this awe. And as Abu Ismail says here, it really hits the heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's izzah, His exaltation, His might hits the heart during those moments. So the more a person's able to engage that type of conversation with their hearts, through this idea of iftiqar, which I hope is a station in this book, iftiqar, the need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a person makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remembering that they are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they are hopeless without Allah, that it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who can change their situation, who can get them out of their problems that they are in. When a person makes dua with all of their heart, all of their emotions, and don't think you can't do this. You can convince your heart to do this. Just remind yourself, when I'm making dua, just bring out those emotions, push them out, right? Push them out with all of your might, and you'll find that it starts coming out. When you make dua, remember, you are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that helps kind of manifest these emotions. And it causes such an impact. It just hits the heart so beautifully, so profoundly, that even, we're not going to expect that the dua is going to be accepted immediately, right? It could be, but not always. It's not going to change a person's situation 180 degrees overnight, but just that feeling that a person gets after speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like this is enough to alleviate a lot of that stress. It's enough to just kind of, let that air out. You know how, counseling, they say that a successful session is when the person talks a lot. The person you're counseling, the more they talk, the more successful it is, because a lot of counseling is just about the person letting out some steam, right? And dua allows us to do that. But it's important that there's that privateness, that because when you're speaking privately to someone, it's more passionate, it's more emotional, and at nighttime, when everything is resting, it kind of gives you some moments to rest and relax. So through dua, through using all of your heart to talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're able to allow the heart to feel the exaltation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His might and His sheer power subhanahu. And when a person does this, they start feeling and experiencing the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart starts to experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and who He is. Because, praying is great, but if you don't have that khushu', if the heart isn't engaged as much as the body is, then, it's not as impactful. But dua, because it's so personal, because it's so relative to a person's individual situation, because it's one-on-one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it has such a profound impact on the heart. And it just brings the heart closer to Allah. And it teaches the heart how to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this idea of musamara, this kind of review, musamara is a type of conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's between the heart and Allah. Right? We can talk to one another, as human beings, but if you're just having a regular conversation, it's not that impactful. But if it's heart to heart, it's a lot more impactful and a lot more engaging. Also, when it's the heart speaking, the heart is a vessel of emotions. When you let your heart say the dua instead of your mind, and there's nothing wrong with either way. When a person says, okay, let me think about what I need, what my situation is, and then make dua, that's perfectly fine and that's beautiful and it's important. But that's different when you search the heart and say, heart, what do you need? Right? And then you make dua from the heart. Because what you'll find is that the needs of the mind and the needs of the heart are quite different. And the heart is able to really engage spirituality a lot more than the mind can. So this idea of musamara is letting the heart speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when it's done like that, it's a heart speaking out of love to what it loves, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and even if a person who's trying to make dua through love and through their heart is not able to reach their heart isn't super impacted by it, it will be impacted to an extent. And the more a person does it, and this is very important, by the way, the more a person makes dua, the more they will see their dua manifested in their life. And the more they see their dua manifested in their life, the more tranquility it brings the heart. The more tawakkul it brings the heart, dependence on Allah. The more love it brings to the heart of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, it's just nothing short of amazing to ask for something and then to see it. I made dua. I mean, whoever wants yaqeen, whoever wants certainty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then make dua. Because when a person makes dua and they see it answered exactly as it was, or even better than it was requested, I mean, what more evidence do you want that there's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala listening to you and answering your call? And subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's nothing more. I mean, you just experience it and you'll know. Words can't express this, really. Just experience it. And if a person's heart, sometimes we feel okay, we're comfortable in our lives. We feel stability, we feel, alhamdulillah, we have what we need. Allah has been kind to us, and Allah is always kind to us despite our situation, or regardless of our situation. However, sometimes you're in an emotional high, or you're optimistic, you're comfortable, and dua is more of a luxury now than it is of a need. So if it's not impacted by that need, it's impacted by something a little bit different, and that is, when a child, or how can I put this? When a child, or I'm not going to use a child, let's say a sibling. When you have a sibling who, anything you ask him for or you ask her for, and they're always like, you got it. You're my little sister. I'll always take care. Whatever you need, I'll do it for you. I mean, that creates a type of, I feel spoiled, right? And that spoiledness, there's a comfort that comes with that. Now, I didn't mention kids because, it might be bad for them, but when it's siblings, I think it's a little bit different. Anything you need, I have your back. You feel spoiled. So if we're not in a situation where we are in need for certain things, or we are concerned or stressed out or dealing with hardships or challenges, when we make dua, we feel this type of spoiledness. How fortunate am I to have a Lord who is willing, who wants to give me, who will always answer my dua. I mean, that's just a type of spoiledness, that a luxury that, if you don't have it, the person has lost a lot. And look what's going on today. Toilet paper. People are fighting over toilet paper. Think about that. No, just really think about that. This invisible virus has brought human beings down to their knees, to the extent that they're fighting over something to wipe themselves with. But for us Muslims, and don't underestimate this. Don't think because, I'm not the strongest Muslim, that this isn't there. No, it's there. We Muslims, you'll find that on average, we're panicking a lot less than other people. We're not going to the stores and buying 300 bags of toilet rolls. Why? Because in the end, we know we have a Lord who is Razzaq and Hafiz. We have a Lord who provides and protects. We know that. That is a luxury for us that others don't have. So they're panicking, they're going crazy, they're preparing for the alien invasion. Why? Because this is lost. They don't have this. When they go to the store, they're trying to survive. But for us Muslims, فَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of protectors, and He is the most merciful. We'll be okay. We'll get through this. Doesn't mean we won't be harmed by this. It doesn't mean people won't be affected by this. It doesn't mean Muslims are immune to the virus. But we are, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, immune to the stress and the panic and the sheer fear of the situation. Or at least it's mitigated quite a bit. So, when you see people fighting over toilet paper and fighting over water and whatnot, I mean, we should feel a type of concern, and also a type of criticism towards ourselves, that we have a luxury that we could share with them, and we're not doing enough to share it with them. Allah is not limited. Allah is unlimited. And for everyone, Allah's bounties are unlimited. So remember that. When we feel a sense of calmness over what's going on, and we don't feel that, alhamdulillah, we have water, right? Muslims were taught water, so it gives us an alternative. But the not feeling the need to fight over toilet paper, it goes back to something theological, and that is our belief that Allah is the protector and the provider. So I mean, we have this luxury, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoils us whenever, but we just need to kind of recognize that and take advantage of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to everyone, وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمْ وَدْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ. He says, make dua and I will answer your call. He doesn't make it conditional. If you need me, make dua. So when we talk to each other, if you need anything, let me know. If you don't need anything, you'll be okay. Don't let me know. But for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His dua isn't conditional. You're not saying if you are in a certain situation, or if you're a certain person, or if you have certain needs, then call to me. Whatever you need, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to ask for it, and I will answer. And finally, Abu Ismail says, وَتُفْصِمُ الْمُعَايَنَةِ بِصَدْمَةِ الْعِزَّةِ. Here he's saying that when we do this type of conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we are engaged in this private session and conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's speaking from the heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and bringing the heart closer to Him, what this does is that emotional impact that it has on our hearts will cause a division between us and sinning, between us and disobedience, because it builds a sense of loyalty. So Also, another type of exaltation, glorification comes about through this type of conversation is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's lordship becomes clearer and clearer to us. How so? When we make dua, we are reminding ourselves that Allah is the provider, not anyone else. And if Allah is the one who provides, He is the one who withholds as well. Likewise, that all strength and might is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if He is the possessor of all strength and might, that means any might and strength aside from Him is sourced in Him. And finally, any authority or power, He is the source of that in the same regards. So when we make dua, we are reminding ourselves and our minds, we are kind of developing our minds to understand the world from this lens, from the lens of exaltation of Allah, that Allah is the source, and therefore all fear, all concern should be in Him. I should not fear coronavirus, because coronavirus is a creation of Allah. It cannot act, it cannot do anything except by the permission of Allah. So if we're making dua, oh Allah, protect us from the coronavirus, help us mitigate the spread, give us the patience to deal with this, we are also reminding ourselves of a theological point, and that is coronavirus cannot do anything except by the permission of Allah. And therefore do not fear coronavirus, fear Allah. And remember that Allah doesn't do these things except because there are certain shortcomings. And if we are able to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this way, if we are able to channel any of our concerns, our stresses, our fears to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what that does, pay attention to this, what that does is it liberates us from fearing anything else. Fear is a very powerful emotion. And I have no doubt that the governments now are utilizing this to stop the spread. And that is justified. But fear is very powerful, and it can really control societies. It can control people. But if we recognize these theological points, and our fear is now exclusively from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, essentially that removes fear of anything besides Him, and that liberates us from everything besides Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in verses, that we mentioned last week. فَلَا تَخَافُوهُمْ وَخَافُونِي. Don't fear them, fear me. They are under my control. Don't have fear of anyone besides Allah, because that's true freedom. If I'm not afraid, of not having toilet paper at home, then I'm not going to go and kill myself and fight others for it. If I'm not afraid of running out of food, I'm not going to go and harm someone for it or fear other people of doing it. So fear is very powerful, but sensitive as well. This station helps us, kind of build a mindset of fear, what its purpose is, its dynamics, and how to utilize it in a way that connects us to Allah, brings us closer to Allah, but also liberates us from everything and anything besides Allah. It frees us from being slaves of the creation by becoming slaves and servants of the Creator Himself subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with that concludes the station of fear. The next station is the station of al-ishfaq, compassion. And this is not compassion of Allah to us, but rather compassion of ourselves, or compassion. Let me just keep at compassion, inshallah. We'll do that next week. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.